Good morning, everyone. I want to thank the board of the Pennsylvania Prescribed Fire Council for the invitation to talk to you today about our efforts to restore ecosystem health and reduce wildfire risk in this globally rare degraded pitch pine scrub oak barrens located in, of all places, the capital city of New York State. But before I begin, I'm going to start with the acknowledgments because while I'm here talking to you today, I'm representing the work of our commission members, our board, our staff, our volunteers, our partners, and of course, our funders, in particular, the New York State Environmental Protection Fund and a number of wildfire risk reduction grants from the Forest Service. I want to put that up front. You may be familiar with northeastern pitch pine scrub oak barrens, northeastern pine barrens, but they really exist in this today in an archipelago of habitat islands scattered across the Northeast, including several really nice ones here in Pennsylvania. They're a suite of globally rare, isolated, fire-dependent communities, biodiversity hotspots. All of them have been pretty seriously degraded as a result of fire suppression, invasive species development, and so forth. So today, they're all pretty much conservation reliant. And most importantly, from an ecological perspective or a wildfire risk reduction perspective, all of us inherited degraded sites. So none of us have a really good reference community to tell us what it is that we're supposed to be doing. So we've pretty much been making this up as we go. So I'm going to talk to you today about what we've been learning up in Albany. Pretty much all of these pine barrens are relics of two things: soils. They're either ridgetop barrens, like you have some here in Pennsylvania and up in New York, but also on glacial. They exist largely on glacial sand deposits, and including the Albany pine bush. But they're also, pretty much all of them are relics of indigenous fire stewardship. And we've been investigating this across the region, but also in Albany. And you can see that sediment core in the middle of that slide. That's about just under a meter of peat, an organic matter that we cored in one of our Pine Barrens vernal ponds. That thing held 6,600 years of record for us, and the fire history goes all the way back to the very beginning. There's no way the fire frequency that we have in these systems was ever fully dominated and controlled by lightning. This was all across, we're learning this all across the Northeast, all across North America and around the world. Indigenous fire stewardship was largely responsible for a lot of the fire regimes that helped to create and maintain many of these ecosystems. And for us in Albany, that was largely the Mohican people. So now they're in Wisconsin, but we are well within the heart of the Mohican territory. Despite the famous book, those folks, the Mohicans, are still around. And by and large, the Albany pine bush represents the best remaining global example of an inland pitch pine scrub oak barrens. It's best characterized, we're now figuring out, it's kind of a savanna within a savanna. It's a grassy shrubland or a shrubby grassland underneath this open canopy of pitch pine and oak trees. It's the Albany pine bush is the type locality for the Corner blue. That's a federally endangered species. We'll talk more about that animal in a minute. But also because it sits on this massive field of parabolic sand dunes, the largest field of parabolic sand dunes east of the Rockies that's not on the coast, so kind of an inland dune system. And because of that, the site's a national natural landmark, as well as holding other important designations like important bird area and bird conservation area. The preserve and the commission were created by law in 1988. And of the original 25,000 or so acres of this habitat that existed originally, there are fewer than 6,000 acres of open space left. And you can see that on the map. The darkest green shading represents the protected lands. That's about 3,400 acres. And that brighter green color is all of the remaining open space in this landscape that we're hoping to protect. But you can see it's situated within a pretty urban landscape, right? We look at this map and we all go, wooey, because that's the wooey. Ultimately, we're working toward a goal of 5,380 acres protected. But the law that created the commission established it. Our board members, the folks I'm responsible to, it's chaired by the commissioner of DEC, co-chaired by the commissioner of state parks. Then you've got the Albany County Executive, town supervisors, the mayor of the city of Albany, the state director of the Nature Conservancy, and 4 private citizens appointed by the governor and approved by the Senate. So as much as this managing this place is about fire and science, it's also an awful lot about managing and dealing with people and the human environment that we live in. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. Our goals here, mandated by law, are really primarily ecological, restoring pitch pine scrub oak barrens, doing that with fire. That's right in the law. and programmatic, of course, dealing with recreation and educational benefits, but also I put programmatic in reducing hazardous fuel loads is also a programmatic goal of ours. And we've been managing the site with prescribed fire since 1991. The program initially started as a project of the Eastern New York chapter of the Nature Conservancy. Now the commission is its own entity within the Department of Environmental Conservation. And initially we were pretty naive. Simply put fire in the landscape and we'll recover cardinal blue butterflies, we'll reduce hazardous fuel loads, we'll get pitch pine and all these important native plants regenerating. And the reality is that was far from the truth, and I'll walk you through some of that learning. But in particular, early on, we started with an 8-week spring window, and those fires were in pitch pine scrub oak barrens, especially on second entries, were incredibly challenging logistically. They produced a ton of smoke. If you top kill scrub oak that's 15 feet tall, as probably some of you know, that second entry, when you're going back into standing dead scrub oak on top of huckleberry and blueberry, that's a prescribed fire that you see in the upper right there. That one almost got away from us. We did lose one in 1999, a small fire, small 7-acre prescribed fire, ended up burning 65 acres in the preserve. So in addition to being logistically challenging, these dormant season fires were only marginally ecologically effective. Yes, they reduced the hazardous fuels, but they really only top killed the woody plants we wanted to suppress. They made some of the invasive species issues we had worse. They did not expose mineral soil. We did not see lupin, a considerable amount of lupin expansion. Lupins is important, and that'll come up again, but that's a sole food plant for several threatened and endangered butterflies in the preserve. And most importantly, how can you have a viable ecosystem if you're not getting regeneration of your staple tree, in this case, pitch pine? So as a result of those fires, and particularly the escape, we largely shut down and did a 2-year AAR and did some experimenting with other ways of trying to reduce hazardous fuels and generate conditions for more logistically feasible fire, but also more ecologically beneficial fire. And that led us to these combination treatments of mechanical pretreatments followed up by growing season fires. This was the original experiment in 2004 with an 8-acre pitch pine scrub oak thicket. Mowed the whole thing, burned half of it, saw some phenomenal fire behavior, incredible heat pulse from these fires, but great fire behavior, low flame lengths, very low rates of spread, long resonance time. We can talk more about that after if you want. And you can see the response there. One important caveat here is we did end up killing 50% of the mature pitch pine trees that were in the prime of their life. There were 20 pitch pines in that unit. And that kind of heat pulse on the root collar will kill even pitch pine. And this just shows the results of that experiment. In the upper left, you're looking at structurally, we made some big changes and some important changes that we wanted to see. And in that bar graph down below, in particular, exposing mineral soil, eliminating litter and duff was phenomenal. One combined treatment got us farther than we ever had gotten before with multiple repeated dormant season fires. My staff gets tired of me saying it. They play a game they call Pine Bush Bingo. That I'll talk about, peeling the onion in the dormant season, because dormant season fire just scratches the surface, and even repeatedly going back, you never really get to the center of the Tootsie Roll. But we did in these treatments, saw some great responses, but more importantly, that lower right-hand scatter plot shows that the plant species composition was largely the same between the two treatments. So we altered the structure, but didn't alter the plant species composition, which is really what we were going for. And this was a pretty big paradigm shift for us. So now we are largely in the restoration phase, utilizing these combinations of mechanical and chemical pretreatments before growing season fire to reset things. And then in the maintenance stage, we're actually using both growing season and dormant season fires to try and maintain the gains that we've got. But that's mowing, you can see there with the hydroax, a lot of silvicultural work, some herbicide work, even herbiciding scrub oak. You cannot kill scrub oak. If you want to open up a thicket of scrub oak, you are not going to do that with fire alone. And then following up in some areas, if it's a black locust removal, we're planting a whole suite of species. But following up in high quality barrens after these growing season fires, we're only interseeding lupin with phenomenal results. You can see here what we've treated. This is largely in the last 10 to 15 years, about 1,000 acres of forest thinning, 400 acres of black locust removal, 350 acres of scrub oak mowing and herbiciding to open that canopy up and create more sunshine for the prairie grasses and wildflowers. And at the bottom there, you can see a sense of, even in dense pitch pine stands, we're going in and thinning those pretty aggressively, which has multiple benefits that we'll talk about in a few minutes. And this gives us some really good fire behavior and some phenomenal fire effects. I throw this slide in here. All of these are from the same day. You can see our fire manager, Tyler Briggs, there on the left. This is a really complicated unit when we hate burning. That is the Albany landfill back there producing methane. This is Interstate 90, and this is a pretty busy county highway. And you're looking kind of east, so it's a difficult spot to burn. But these growing season combined mechanical and fire treatments really give us great smoke behavior, great fire behavior. We can actually burn on the wetter end of the prescription with light and variable winds because that heat pulse pushes all that smoke and steam almost straight up. So we like these burns a lot, actually. Pucker factor is significantly reduced with those growing season fires. And here you can just see the results of all of that, particularly since about 2005. Combination of growing season and dormant season fire. It's enabled us to open the burn window now throughout most of the year and get a lot more fire on the ground, a lot more days. We're burning now on average around 300 acres a year in our site. And that's what it looks like on the ground, all the areas we've managed, and most importantly, in restoring the biodiversity of this place, one of our foundational research projects that helped establish the commission and the Barrens said that we needed at least 2,000 acres, and we should be burning about 10% of that a year. The oranges and reds are what we want to see on this map. Those are all sites that have been burned within the last 10 years. And increasingly, we're getting more and more acres out of restoration phase and into the maintenance phase. But that's the kind of power diversity we want. But ultimately, right, the goal was ecosystem viability here, as well as reducing wildfire risk. So how do we know if we're advancing ecosystem health when we have no reference community to measure our work against? We're looking, so we do a couple of things with our in-house shop, the science staff that I supervise. We look at the distribution area of those earlier seral stages of pitch pine scrub oak barrens, but also more importantly, the distribution and abundance of the rare wildlife that depends on this habitat. Because absent a reference community, listening to the plants and the animals will actually tell us a lot more about the health of the ecosystem than any measure of plant diversity or any idea that we might have, right? I live in a house. I don't live in this place. So we listen to the wildlife. And in particular, looking at the distribution and abundance of some of those rare wildlife that really need this habitat. And not just one species, but a number of species across several taxonomic groups. So I want to start with this slide, and this is busy just because I know this is being archived. You can see there the 4 successional variants of pitch pine scrub oak barrens, 4 ecological communities according to the Natural Heritage Program and how they're defined. I've superimposed there what we think the maintenance fire regime needs to be for these communities, but that's still very much a work in progress. But more importantly, I want you to focus on the bottom of that slide. You can see that, in 1990, there were fewer than 500 acres of high-quality pitch pine scrub oak barrens communities, the grassland, the barrens, and the thicket. And today we have about 1,300 acres of the preserve is now dominated by that community. And we're aggressively working on reducing the scrub oak forest and turning that also into barrens for a number of reasons that we'll get into. But all of this work is also facilitating some great plant responses that we've wanted to see from the very beginning. Well, we've needed to plant an awful lot of lupin. We've gone from fewer than 13 acres when I started in 96 to now it's close to 800 acres of lupin across the landscape. Again, that's a sole food plant for the endangered corner blue, as well as the state threatened frosted elfin. That's a federal candidate species, and seen a phenomenal response by the butterflies. But also other things that we aren't necessarily planting, like New Jersey tea. New Jersey tea is a sole food plant for mottled dusky-winged skippers. That's a rare skipper in New York. And New Jersey tea has just exploded across the preserve. And only recently have I learned that we probably have one of the largest, if not the largest population of that plant and that animal anywhere in its range, because we've got an awful lot of bow hunters in the preserve. So we've reduced the deer pressure and exploded the population of New Jersey tea, Ceanothus americana, and seen a phenomenal response in the mottled dusky wing as well. But more importantly, we're also finally, with these growing season burns, exposing mineral soil, we're getting great pitch pine regeneration. And in the places we've been doing all of this work, this plant, Virginia marble seed or Virginia false gromwell, was thought to have been extirpated from New York State for well over 100 years. And it's this innocuous, it's a beautiful plant, but it's, this innocuous green thing and amongst a sea of green. But it wasn't until we were out there picking lupin seeds by hand with our face in the plants that our botanist picked up on. He saw a plant he couldn't identify. And lo and behold, that's what it was. So this is some great response. But one of the things, the real aha moment for me, and as the conservation director here, is seeing the phenological and biological response to growing season fires. Growing season fire is a game changer in these systems. We obviously we're in the middle of breeding season for everything. So we apply a 1/3 rule. You saw how fragmented the preserve is. In general, we don't treat more than a third of any given fragment because of the fragmentation. But also our state and federal permits require for Corner blues that we cannot burn more than a third of a subpopulation, and we can't burn adjacent thirds in consecutive years. And all of that, both the 1/3 rule in general and for the butterfly, is all about refugia, right? We're killing a bunch of individuals, but creating and benefiting habitat that helps the populations of those wildlife grow. And that's what we've seen. But also, growing season fire, it's crazy how plastic plants can be. It extends the phenology of the plants. Even within that burn unit, you can see a number of all this lupin that didn't burn. So that's refugia within a burn unit that we never get in the dormant season, right? You burn Carner habitat in the dormant season, and largely it burns. It's what a lot of us were trained to do is you make it black from one end to the other. But in actuality, from a maintenance perspective, seeing this mosaic across the burn unit is phenomenal. Those are all little pockets of refugia for Carners and lots of other things. But more importantly, the lupin that pops up, because lupin's a perennial, and the same thing is true for New Jersey tea, scrub oak, all these plants that pop up in the black following fire. They stay green longer. They're more nutritious, right? Because of the nutrient cycling that's triggered by fire. They're also, because they're putting on all their vegetation at once, their defense chemicals are at their lowest. So literally the plants are more nutritious and more palatable for things like Corner blues and in the case of scrub oak for inland Barrens buck moths than it was had we not burned. But also what we're seeing is when we burn these things in the early growing season, plants that typically are frost killed very early on stay green way after killing frost. They don't know what the plant chemistry is that allows that to happen. Lupin typically dies back in mid-July, stays green until September, October. Scrub oak, the same thing. So we're actually improving the quality and the quantity of the foliage for all these herbivorous insects that we're trying to protect. And we did some work in the lab in New Hampshire and saw actually that female Corner blues that fed on lupin coming up after a fire lay significantly more eggs than females that did not feed on that. So fire is clearly, it's the same thing we hear about in the prairie states with bison and foraging animals moving and following all that fresh foliage because it's that much better for them. And it improves fitness, and you improve fitness of the individual, you improve the growth capacity of the population overall, and that's what we've seen. So that creates a much greater resilience for these animals, which is particularly important now as we're trying to build a resilient landscape in the face of climate change. Corner population has responded incredibly. Starting in 2007, we had a few hundred animals, and we started, this is all the same, using the same method of counting butterflies in the same sites. So in 2007 at these sites, we had a few hundred. We're now on average well over 10,000 a year. And the Fish and Wildlife Service declared our population fully recovered in 2016. And you can see it fluctuates. The federal recovery threshold is 3,000. Our target is about 7,500, and that's to make sure that we never fall below 3,000 because insect populations fluctuate wildly, as you can see there. But great response by Corner blues. Also by all these other insects. For the sake of time, I'm going to largely skip this, but moths, bees, ants, phenomenal response. We've also rediscovered several species, in particular a rare moth and a rare butterfly that were thought to have been extirpated again from all of New York State, pop up in these places that we're managing the hardest, particularly with growing season fire and these mechanical treatments. So great responses. Similarly with birds, we've got very big, very large, robust populations of early successional or young forest bird species, seeing these populations grow over time, and we are monitoring birds with point counts and with bird banding. But also we had the whippoorwills have reestablished a breeding population in this landscape after being gone for more than 30 years. As a birder, I never thought I would see that. I studied whippoorwills in grad school, but that's a phenomenal response to see that animal move back, and not just one, but we now have consistently a small breeding population that seems to be growing. And we're tracking those whippoorwills with GPS to figure out just how they're interacting with our burn units. That's all in-house local stuff. Regionally, we also participate in this 5-year Regional Conservation Needs Grant with a bunch of other grasslands and xeric habitats looking at pollinators, in particular solitary bees and butterflies and moths. And the pine bush really stands out amongst the more than 20 sites that were studied. in particular for its high species richness and high abundance of rare bees and moths. So this place truly is one of the best remaining pitch pine scrub oak barrens. And you can see that it's a that picture is of the trail was a growing season fire from this past spring. If you look hard, there's a whole bunch of lupin blooming, and it still strikes me as odd that we're burning blooming lupin and cornered blue butterflies during the flight season and only seeing the population grow as a result. Counterintuitive to what we initially thought and what the Fish and Wildlife Service feared early on. So we're reducing fuel loads, we're restoring ecosystem health, but realize and remember that map, we're working in a pretty populated human landscape. So communication is really key, especially because our funding is state funding, is taxpayer funding. So every year we send out this is the postcard from a couple of years ago, but that postcard goes out to over 7,000 folks around the preserve, and it gives them a link so they can sign up to be notified whenever we're burning in the preserve or when we're burning near them. We send a whole bunch of officials. So we do a lot of communication and outreach and education with the community at large, postcards, educational programming, field trips and hikes and that kind of thing, but also simple things like billboards, right? Simple message. Somebody drives by, you got hundreds of thousands of people driving by every day. And that simple billboard tells them, oh, that's not a wildfire, that's conservation work happening. And we have similar billboards for some of our other work, whether we're mowing, particularly when we're doing silvicultural work, and seeing some good responses. And of course, being in the capital, there are 3 local, network affiliates. This is the NBC affiliate. As the burn unit is smoldering, they're standing on the side of the road talking to our fire manager, Tyler Briggs, about the burn of the day. So is all that education and outreach having an effect? Cornell says yes. So the Cornell, this used to be it's a Center for Conservation and Social Science now. It used to be the Human Dimensions Research Unit. They did it was a graduate student level project looking at what people think of our management of the preserve within a 10-mile radius. Great support for a prescribed fire program and removing invasive species, but we have discovered it is far less intuitive to people why we would be mowing scrub oak barrens down to the ground, or let alone cutting trees in a nature preserve. Prescribed fire thing they get, cutting trees in a nature preserve less so. So and this has helped us refine our education and outreach work considerably. But this is a great project, great study, and really helped reaffirm for us. We talk a lot about communicating with the public, and if we don't have a ton of people screaming at us, you think you're being successful, but this really helps show that we are actually reaching people. And unfortunately, you can't see the top of that. So we had a lot of Canadian wildfire smoke last year, right? People are increasingly thinking about climate change and wildfires. That picture is actually one I took while doing point counts last June. That's actually Canadian wildfire smoke. That's not fog in the preserve at eye level. The local newspaper wrote an op-ed all about climate change and Canadian wildfires, and they had a bit nice section in there recognizing the work of the preserve. And they said, you can read the quote there, but we commend the preserve on its 3 decades of responsible fire management. We're saving more than the cornered blue and other endangered species with these burns. We're saving ourselves. So it was nice that the small local paper put all of this in context, but also helped to reaffirm that our efforts are successful, not only in what we're physically doing on the ground, but also in our communication and outreach. And this similarly last year, we updated our fire management plan and put that out for public review for like a month and a half and held a public meeting. Nobody came. We had 1 comment. This was it. And I just took an excerpt from this, but it was very positive and said, same thing. I see huge wildfires in the news and feel proud that the local community manages this threat so effectively. And for us, we thought that was great, following up on the op-ed, until the local brewery, the Fort Orange Brewery in Albany, came out with this new tasty beverage that I cannot endorse. But it's a beautiful label and really kind of exemplifies what we've been trying to do in the preserve. And we saw that as really a phenomenal success of our work. But we have outstanding questions. How am I doing on time? Great. So a few outstanding questions. The big one, of course, is the maintenance fire regime. How frequently do we need to burn to maintain the goals that we've achieved? Right, we thinned the scrub oak. I don't want any more scrub oak recruitment. Scrub oak starts producing acorns in year 3. They ripen in year 4. We want pitch pine recruitment. We don't want too much. So we're starting to think about how frequently do we need to burn to get at that, which again is putting us back on what we think was that indigenous fire stewardship fire regime, much like the Southeast. Very frequent, low intensity, low severity fires will help us maintain these goals. But we're still trying to work on that and figure that out. Invasive species, there are a number of reasons why we think increased fire frequency is where we need to go. Climate change, of course, is a real wild card. The predictions are increased flammability and fire opportunities in the future. And this is already affecting, and we saw this, I think you probably saw this last year too. We went from a dry spell to a really wet spell last summer, and that really affected when we can put fire on the ground. And that's particularly important when you're trying not only to burn fuel, but also stimulate a biological response, right? We're not so much fire managers as we are fire effects managers, and fire effects really depend on when you burn, how frequently you burn, where you burn. So climate change has the potential to really shuffle the deck on us and when we can do that. But climate change is also important because things like this, right? Perfect example today. What's the temperature outside? Around 40 some odd degrees. So southern pine beetle, which is native to the southeast, was kind of up into the southern end of the New Jersey pine lands, is now decimating pitch pine stands on Long Island that are overstocked. And that's largely a result of, I don't want to say warming winters, but it's that winters are less cold, right? The lows are significantly higher. And it's those low temperatures that kept southern pine beetle in its historic range. And now, as the floor is coming up, you're seeing species like southern pine beetle spread northward. We have them now in the preserve. We've been working with DEC and the Forest Service on monitoring for about the last 7 or 8 years. We've got a low but persistent population, and we're doing a whole bunch of additional monitoring with those folks to try and look at. We've been doing the things that we think need to be done, thinning pitch pine stands, reducing the stand density, following up the prescribed fire, which makes a stand much more resilient to southern pine beetle. But time will tell. But climate change is in fact affecting things like southern pine beetle. It's also affecting the places all these rare species we're currently managing can live, right? So this is, I'm on the federal recovery team for Corner Blues, and there's a sub-team for climate change. Just came out with this report. This is now public. The red on that map at the top shows the current climate footprint for Corner Blues. The black dots are where butterflies exist today. That was kind of model testing, and it turned out, yeah, the model did well in illustrating where corners should be today. But you can see the lower picture shows where they're probably going to be. That's the average climate model in the future. So looking at 2080, the climate envelope for corners is going to be significantly farther north. And that presents two problems. One, we need to try and keep the population here and as large as long as possible so that we have source animals for assisted migration to someplace else, we hope. But the same thing is happening to our south. There are species right now that live south of us that are rare, that are also going to need a place to live in the future. So we see the pine bush not only as a source site for certain species like corners for the future, but also as a recipient site for who knows what species that currently exist south of us in similar pine barrens, but might need a home in the future. So in conclusion, I just want to wrap up here by saying pre-treatments, mechanical pre-treatments are really essential and have dramatically improved our ability to put effective fire on the ground. The big paradigm shift for us is realizing that just how much restoration is not maintenance. And when I give, school lecture groups to colleges and whatnot, I liken it to a doctor's prescription, right? We all call our burn plans prescriptions. What you have to do to get healthy when you're really, really sick, like many of these pine barrens, is completely different than what you need to do if it's already healthy. And that was been a major paradigm shift for us. And we do a lot of monitoring of fire effects on wildlife to actually evaluate if we're successful, and community engagement is critical. But if you get nothing else out of this presentation this morning, I hope you'll appreciate that landscape in that picture. If we can do this here, sandwiched between Albany and Schenectady with the interstate running through it, high-rise nursing homes and very large landfills that are producing methane, and we're still able to get meaningful fire at scale for our lands. If we can do it here, hopefully we can do it. You guys can do it. Anyone can do it just about anywhere. But you do it one fire at a time. And with that, I again want to thank you for the opportunity. And I'm going to be around for the whole workshop. So hopefully if anybody has questions that we can't address now, you'll find me. Thank you.